Our scripture reading for the day comes from 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 2 and 8 through 14. Hear now the word of the Lord. Since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. May God bless the reading of this holy word today. As I read those verses, I'm also reminded of another verse in the New Testament from the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 17, which says, "We share in Jesus' sufferings in order that we may also share in his glory." So Jesus, as we know, definitely suffered in his body, but as we also know, triumphed over that suffering. So 1 Peter and Romans, they say that we should look to Jesus yet again as an example of how we can endure and overcome our own suffering when we go through it. I like that verse 1 there in 1 Peter chapter 4, it says, "Arm yourselves with the same attitude as Jesus." It doesn't say, have the same attitude as Jesus. It's more serious than that. Life is hard. It's a tough world out there with so many pandemic challenges that we've had to figure out in order to protect people. We got to arm ourselves with the right attitude, which is the strength of Jesus Christ. You will need that to make it through this season in our lives. And it's the most important weapon in your arsenal, the most important tool in your toolbox, because it is the one that will overcome any challenge. So arm yourself with the attitude of Jesus Christ. Put all that compassion and service to use no matter what the world throws at you. To get some good instruction for how to do that, we can look at verses 8 through 11, which we just read. The first thing it lists in verse 8 is, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. So love is the go-to action when someone else has messed up. Kind of like pain relievers are the go-to medicine that you take when something hurts. That's what love is like. It helps with everything. Any pain or hurt that you have. Whenever there is wrongness that has been done, or just something that is off, treat it with love. Just like in our physical life, everybody gets aches and pains, so you got to treat that stuff. Don't let it get worse. Don't let the pain keep building up until it is unbearable. Do something about it. Now, I will admit, speaking as a guy, we do tend to wait a little too long to take care of the aches and pains and the stuff that bothers us. Our first treatment for any type of pain or discomfort is to just walk it off and hope that it will eventually get better. Leg cramp? Just walk it off. Sinus infection? Just walk it off. Sprained ankle, compound fracture, punctured spleen? Just walk it off. But sometimes they don't get better until they're treated. So for myself, if there's something wrong, after weeks and weeks of suffering, trying to just walk it off, and I can't take it anymore, I finally call the doctor and make an appointment, and sure enough, it gets better within the week. And my wife says, "I told you so. You should have called the doctor sooner." And again, she's right. Some pain, you can't just walk off. You need to treat it. You treat an infection with antibiotics, and you treat hurt with love, because it covers a multitude of sins. When someone's heart or spirit is hurting, they can't just walk it off. The old saying, "Time heals all wounds," is often repeated, but I'm not sure that it's always true. Time can put a Band-Aid on a wound or hurt, maybe, but that doesn't mean that the hurt is healed. It's still there. So, love each other deeply, verse 8 says. How should we go about doing that? Well, verse 10 says to use whatever gifts you have to serve others. So don't take your talents and gifts for granted, because they are gifts from God that can be used by God to make a difference. And they don't have to look like other people's gifts. God is very creative. Just look around the world in the beautiful diversity of plants and animals and people. So the gifts that we have will be creative and diverse too. So think about, what do you like to do? What are you good at? How can it be used to serve others and to help and show compassion? Those are your gifts. And when you use them, what does the last part of verse 10 say? It says you will be faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. And that's so neat, because it's exactly what the passages from Ephesians chapter 3 said that we read and talked about in our midweek Bible study just this past week. And I confess, I didn't plan that, because I planned the midweek Bible study passages out in a row, and I also planned out the sermon text in a row, and I didn't even think about them connecting. But it is the exact same phrase, the administration of God's grace, that we get to participate in. When you do something you're good at for another person, that simple little act actually administers God's grace. And it's got a lot of various forms, our verses say. So don't discount whatever form you might be gifted at. God is creative, and you are unique, so you can use your gifts to administer God's grace in all kinds of various forms. I can think of so many awesome examples just in our church family here, by the great ways that people use their gifts to serve others and serve this community. We have so many who are great at preparing meals for crowds. We have so many who are great at teaching others and leading Bible studies. We've got many who are great at playing musical instruments that bless us. Folks who are good at organizing food collections for those in need. People who keep track of budgets and expenses. That's super important. Folks gifted in landscaping on the outside, flowers on the inside that help our campus look beautiful. People blessed with technology and sound knowledge. People blessed with the knowledge of fixing things that break so that our building can stay maintained. So many. I could go on, because there are a multitude of ways that you use your gifts to administer God's grace in all its various forms. But just remember, these verses we read, they remind us that using our gifts for God's will isn't always easy. There are a lot of easier things we could be doing and spending our time on in life. Doing something is not as easy as not doing something. Know what I mean? Using your gifts means that you are doing work and putting them to work and being active. And I don't know about you, but the recliner in my living room is really comfortable. And it calls to me with its siren song to just sit and let the day waste away and not worry about being productive or active or others, but just to let everything disappear. That's me. Maybe you have a different temptation, something else that calls you to get distracted and to not serve God. To resist that temptation, we must, again, arm ourselves with the attitude of Christ to help us keep going, to give us that energy when we run out. And I think these days, so many of us are running out of energy. We work and we serve, and sometimes it's hard, and we suffer. Because the Christ that we follow was willing to work and to serve and even to suffer in order to do God's will and God's calling for his life. The early Christians that this letter of 1 Peter was written to, they were having to suffer as well. So this letter was sent to encourage them. Verse 12 that we read talks about a painful trial that they are going through. Verse 13 said that they participate in the sufferings of Christ. So they are having to suffer for their faith as Christians during that time. But why would they? Why would someone or some government give them a hard time just because of their faith? Well, that's because Christians are kind of revolutionary. Those early Christians, they weren't persecuted because of what they believed inside, but because of their actions on the outside. Governments don't really care what people believe as long as they stay in line and don't disrupt the order of things. So early Christian churches were persecuted because of the difference that following Jesus' example made in their outward active lives. They had this gospel message, this good news that God would free captives in prison, help the blind to see, empower people living in poverty, and all the other crazy things that Jesus said he was going to do in Luke chapter 4. But that kind of stuff doesn't play well with those in power, the ones who have the authority and the privilege and don't want to lose their privilege. They don't want people following a different king who wants to help the lowly rise up like Jesus said he would do. So they pushed back against the Christian movement then and still today. There are many, many examples of Christians suffering real and extreme persecution all around the world. One big example of one place that is especially hard is China, where thousands of Chinese Christians have been harassed, and even several Christian U.S. citizens and permanent residents have been detained or arrested in China because of their faith and ministry. One of those folks is named Pastor John Cao. He was born in China and became a legal permanent resident in the U.S. when he came here in the mid-1980s as a student at Campbell University near Raleigh, which I myself have a degree from. He met his wife, who was a student at NC State, and after seminary and doing humanitarian work in China, Pastor John Cow and his wife moved to Greensboro to minister there. And their son even graduated from App State a few years ago. And Pastor John went over to China and to Burma on some mission work to build schools for ethnic minority communities in rural Burma. Talk about service and talk about hard work. Well, he was arrested 2 years ago when he was crossing the border back into China, and he was sentenced to 7 years, hard time, for allegedly organizing others to illegally cross the border, which is a charge the United Nations said was completely arbitrary and meaningless. So he is still there in a Chinese prison now. It's no bigger than a gas station bathroom with 11 other prisoners. His wife fights every day for his release. Another example could be Pastor Wang Yi, who founded the Early Rain Covenant Church in the city of Chengdu, Sichuan province in China, one of many underground churches in China, and it grew so much that it caught the government's attention. But Wang Yi refused to officially register his church because he knew that when churches do that, the government installs surveillance equipment in the church so they can always listen and monitor what the pastor preaches, just in case it is a subversive message. Understandably, Wang Yi didn't want to let that happen, and understandably, he is a staunch believer in the separation of church and state, which the government also does not like there. And about a year and a half ago, police swept into his church and grabbed him up. They didn't even bother making an official case against him. Didn't really need to waste their time with that. And finally, this past January, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for, they said, inciting subversion of state power and illegal business activities. Another of his church's leaders was sentenced to 4 years in prison for illegal business operations, and about 50 of his church's members have been jailed. Many more have been harassed by the police and been placed under house arrest. Isn't that terrible? That they have to live with that fear just because they want to go to church? But again, why would a government do that? Well, it's because they're afraid. You see, right now there are about 116 million Protestant Christians alone in China, and compare that with the about 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party. So we can see why they're concerned. The government is afraid that more people will keep turning to the church for their spiritual needs and not to the official nationalism and patriotic party line. So every year the crackdown on Christian churches in China gets worse. Authorities have removed crosses from Christian churches. They've confiscated church property and forced many, many churches to close. That is real and extreme persecution that is going on today, in the world today. Makes me wonder if churches in China read the book of 1 Peter a lot, because it really applies to the suffering that they are enduring. It makes me so thankful then that we are so fortunate to live where we do, so we don't have to worry about going to jail or getting persecuted just because we want to go to church and practice our faith. Thanks be to God for that. Although, we still might get criticized for living out our faith in real life and following the example that Jesus set. Our verses in 1 Peter reminded us that Jesus suffered because of the message he preached, and that we might suffer too if we really follow in that message, when we start being active to try and really change people's lives, whether they are in need and we give them money and are criticized for being too generous, whether folks are feeling left out and not included in church, and so we're trying to follow Ephesians and the lessons that it has to join everyone together, no matter what. We might face some criticism. I had a friend who pastored a church with a vibrant food ministry that helped feed hungry families. And a member of his church got upset and said that the church shouldn't be doing that, that it wasn't the business of the church. Criticism, just by following the example of Jesus. And there are many more examples like that. Jesus had to endure it from the Pharisees back then, who basically told him, you should do less loving and more shunning like we do. That's what you need. So sometimes I wonder if life would be a lot easier if I didn't follow the example of Jesus. Then I wouldn't have to care about anybody else. I wouldn't have to care about people who are hungry and work to get them some food. I wouldn't have to care about people who are sick and don't have access to health care because of their poverty. I wouldn't have to care about people who might be in prison. But by golly, I have given my life to God's work and Jesus is leading. So that means I have to care. And if you have too, that means you have to care. And I'll tell you, the most amazing things happen when you do. When I care about other people like Jesus did, it turns out that I am the one who is blessed in those situations and interactions. It blesses my life. It gives my life meaning, because that is real life. It's not just going through the motions, but real people, real life, real relationships, and real care about real needs that people have. I hope that one good outcome of this coronavirus time is that we realize how important it is to make real connections with real people in person, and how important it is to care about other people's needs, because we are all connected. Is that hard to do? Yes. A lot harder than just sitting in my comfy recliner, watching TV and thinking whatever I feel like thinking about the world, getting distracted. It's harder to follow Jesus, but it is also amazing. Amazing grace invites us in, and then abundant life is what we receive. So the next time you get some pushback for trying to follow God's will and follow the crazy example of Jesus, remember verse 14. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. That is amazing. The Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. That is good news indeed. And that Spirit and that glory resting on us, giving us that Christ attitude. That is why we will make it through anything the world throws at us. Let us pray. Oh God, we confess that so often in life we have let ourselves get distracted and get tired and fall into unhelpful habits as we give in to our own whims and preferences. So we will need your help. We will need to be convicted by your Spirit. We might even need to be broken open, oh God, so that your Spirit can seep into us and give us a vision of your world that you have called us to work in. May your Spirit give us that power, and may we feel it resting on us. May we arm ourselves with the attitude of your Son, our Christ, so that we will see the world as he did, that we will care for every person as he did, and that we will have the holy endurance that he did to get through anything. We will need that this week. In your holy name we pray. Amen.